Well, speaking of old news, Molly, let's look back a little bit. 15 years ago this week was the decision. That was LeBron taking his talents to South Beach. That event televised on ESPN, such a big deal. I remember where I was. I was actually headed to a good friend's bachelor party. I pulled off on the highway to make sure I can sit there and listen. I had a notebook taking notes on what he said, how it all went down. At the time, I think it was like ESPN's most watched non-game telecast and something like their third best audience ever at the time. This was like at the beginning of when they were showing Monday Night Football before those audience numbers really took off. So it was so impactful. What do you remember from back then with the decision?
Not the physical notes, Austin. I couldn't pull over because I only had my learner's permit, so I needed my mom in the car with me. But I do remember the absolute impact of it. I was hoping he would go to the Bulls, just my Chicago hometown. But it's one of the pivotal moments of sports, and it's hard to believe it's been 15 years.
I mean, here we are 15 years later, and we're still looking at what LeBron's decision is each offseason. It was maybe the biggest news this offseason in 2025. Was he going to stay with the Lakers? And even with him signing that one-year deal with the Lakers, it's like, all right, like, is he going to be traded because the Lakers are kind of looking to retool around Luka? So we're still talking about all of LeBron's decisions because that is what moves the needle with the NBA still.
I mean, honestly, at least I'm older than his son. But Bronny and LeBron playing together at the Lakers, that's special.
And we're going to have Bronny versus Cooper Flag. That's the big Summer League game tonight in Vegas. Do you think it's going to be among the most watched Summer League games yet for ESPN?
I have a hard time imagining it won't be. Honestly, unless you're a huge basketball fan, are you really watching Summer League? But you've got Bronny and you've got Cooper, and those are the two biggest upcoming names, and people are going to be paying attention.
Yeah, those most watched NBA Summer League games to date. No surprise. Zion's debut, that leads the pack by a lot, around 1.6 million viewers. Then you have Wemby's debut. And another one, you had Lonzo Ball back in 2017. That's number 3. People forget how big the Ball family and Lonzo and his arrival in the NBA was. So those are your top 3. Those are the only 3 games in Summer League for ESPN that have drawn over 1 million viewers. We'll see if Cooper versus Bronny can get to that sort of number.
I mean, I'm going to trust you on the numbers side, Austin. That is your ballpark.
All right, some other news making waves this week, Molly. We had a report out of the Financial Times that Apple is in pole position to perhaps land F1 media rights. Apple obviously behind the F1 film that came out, and those box office numbers continue to be really huge. I really love the movie, but do you think it's going to be a good decision for F1 to move from ESPN to Apple? We've seen what Apple and MLS, that relationship has been. Everything kind of like very dark in terms of numbers. Is it the right move for Liberty and F1?
You and I talked about the F1 film last week, and I said to you that I thought Apple was going to throw its hat in the ring. That's not based on sources. That's just common sense. Do I think it's a good idea for F1? MLS is struggling with accessibility, being behind that Apple paywall. I don't want to comment on if it's a smart move for F1 because they have the financials, they have everything. But based on what we've seen with MLS, they're not going to gain viewership by going to Apple. ESPN has much broader distribution, especially with that D2C service coming up. It's a gamble going to Apple. How about that?
Oh, it's definitely a gamble. But it's basically, shockingly, coming down to money. Is Apple going to cut a much bigger check than what ESPN's going to give them? Because if we've seen anything, we've talked about this time and time again, Jimmy Pitaro is going to remain financially prudent on what he spends ESPN and Disney's money on. We saw that obviously with Major League Baseball and other properties, even letting something like the Big Ten go after a 30-year relationship. So they are going to be fiscally responsible on what they spend. We talked about a number out there that F1 was looking for originally, somewhere between $160 and $180 million a year. ESPN's only paying $90 million a year right now. It's going to settle somewhere, between $110 and $120 a year. But I also don't think that ESPN is out of this. My sources are telling me that they're likely still in the game. They're just waiting to see what Liberty wants to do. Do they want to go to an Apple and take that check? Or do they want to remain visible? And the numbers are there to support that it is successful on ESPN. The numbers this season for F1 are approaching the best numbers that they've had there. Maybe it's going to be the second best season that F1 has had on ESPN. So it has shown that it is stable there. Somewhere between, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million viewers on average for the season.
And ESPN's reliable, right? You know what you're getting with ESPN. They have that distribution. They have the production. They have the framework. Apple is still not necessarily learning sports because they've done MLB for a while. They've done MLS. They do have that kind of base framework, but they're still figuring it out. F1.
They're being active. We've talked about them being in pole position for maybe one of these packages for more MLB rights that was previously with ESPN. So Eddie Q, Jim DiLorenzo, that whole team at Apple really being aggressive in what they want to do in the sports space.
This is a sports media podcast, so of course we're talking about sports media, but every major media property is now invested in sports. You have to be. It's where the action is, it's where the viewers are, it's where the advertisers are. So it does not surprise me that Apple is very interested in F1.
Last thing I want to say about F1, Molly, I absolutely are going to be watching Drive to Survive on Netflix next season, especially with the news this week that Christian Horner out after 20 years at Red Bull Racing. That's why people love watching this. There's a lot of drama, not just with the drivers, but with the team principals. They're just as important. Not something you see necessarily on Netflix with like that NASCAR series. You don't see a lot of the team principals really going after one another, not like you see in F1. So very interesting news this week from Christian Horner and Red.
It's a lot more dramatic at F1 than NASCAR for sure. Austin, I need you to stop hitting my inbox late at night with big news like the Big East and ESPN re-upping their deal. Can you break that down for us?
It's something I've been following for around a year now because I knew after they signed their media rights deal, their linear TV one, that included obviously re-upping with Fox, also including NBC and TNT Sports as part of that. There was also like a fourth element out there that was not part of that rights deal signed in 2024. And that's that old Big East digital network. For the last 3 school years, that has been with Flow Sports. Knew that was coming up. So I'm kind of been paying attention to where that might possibly land. Well, it's here and it's moving from Flow Sports back to ESPN. We have the Big East and the ESPN back together. So much history there between the conferences. ESPN, the Big East, first signed a deal back in 1980. That was the Big East's first national TV deal. So there's a lot of history there. And it was very sad when those two separated back in 2013, when that conference kind of collapsed and you had the Catholic schools go their own way and signing on with Fox Sports there. But they're back. So what does this deal mean? It's strictly going to be an ESPN Plus, ESPN digital sort of deal. And it gives content for that direct-to-consumer service that's going to be launching in the fall. You'll have around 25 men's basketball games, all non-conference, but this is going to be huge for other sports, women's basketball in particular, a lot of Olympic sports. Women's sports in general will have a strong place on ESPN Plus, on that direct-to-consumer service as part of this deal.
Reading the details of the deal and from your story, I think it's huge for women's basketball. And the Big East is not a football conference. We know that. That's very common sense. But you've got UConn, you've got really strong women's basketball. And Austin, you and I have talked about this offline, but conference realignment has really bothered me in the ways that it's impacting Olympic sports. With the Pac-12 dissolution, you have really strong Olympic schools like Stanford that are now trying to figure out what to do. So I think a media deal like this that is putting investment into those Olympic sports is really important, and I'm happy to see ESPN doing it. And to your point, it's really good for their D2C product. You got to give people content if they want to pay $29.99 a month for yet another streaming service.
Yeah, Molly, plenty of big brands in that Big East. Not going to be a lot of UConn women's basketball games as part of this package, but plenty of other high-profile schools that you're going to be able to watch. Molly, this week, you were also at the premiere of Netflix's series Quarterback Season 2. How was that event?
It was enjoyable. It was at the Crosby Hotel in Manhattan, which I actually didn't realize till I walked in. I've been to a couple screenings there before. They've got this cool little venue in the ground floor of the Crosby. No Manning brothers there, unfortunately, so I couldn't ask Eli and Peyton what they thought about it. We had Bud Light there because Bud Light's one of the major sponsors. It was a good event.
What'd you think about episode 1?
I think you and I have different opinions on it. I was interested. Maybe that's because I was at the screening and you had the audience reaction and everything. You've seen further than I have.
I'm through the first 2 episodes so far.
All right, and I've only seen the first one. Jared Goff, charismatic. Kirk Cousins, interesting choice, I will say. My brother is a diehard Falcons fan. And just knowing, as you and I are sports people, seeing the way that season played out with Penix joining, we know how the season played out, right? Like, Cousins got benched. So having him as one of your 3 stars, I mean, and Burrow was so charismatic, and I don't know. I liked it. I can see why the football fan would be watching this.
Well, I think it's incredibly well produced. Everything Omaha Productions touches these days is well produced. But I got to say, Kirk Cousins is boring. And the only thing I'm going to be interested in watching later this season is his reaction to that bench and when Michael Penix Jr. kind of takes over. And the camera's going to be on him. How does he react to probably the biggest setback in his professional career? I also agree that Jared Goff is kind of vanilla. It was pretty boring. Nothing really interesting stood out there. They focused a lot more on his now wife than they did in him. There was more of that dynamic. But Molly, the one who was the most charismatic for me as well was Joe Burrow. Love seeing all the emphasis on the fashion. They even got in Kyle Smith, who is the NFL's fashion editor, the first fashion editor for the NFL. They listed him as Joe Burrow's stylist when they, introduced him in the episode. He is way, way more than that. Works with so many NFL players on creating their style, but particularly worked with Joe on what he was doing around Fashion Week in Paris. So really good to see him get some love on the show. He was really good on our panel when we had him at Force back in the spring. I want to see where the show goes. Like you said, we know the results of the season. The thing I'm most interested to see is not anything about Kirk Cousins' life or his personality, but his reaction to getting benched.
Austin, I will be finishing the series this weekend. I don't have too many plans. It's too hot to go outside. So if not these three quarterbacks, who would be three that you would want to watch?
I think top of my list, Jaden Daniels. I want to see him taking over with the Commanders. I maybe want to see Jalen Hurts. Maybe see him open up a little bit. He's got the ring now. All right, maybe he could be a little more personable now that, he's got the hardware, he's got the accolades, he's got the contract. Those are some guys that I would really want to see on the show.
You and I have both interviewed Jalen. He is a man of few words, so I would actually love to see him open up more.
Would love to see that. But speaking of Netflix, Molly, I want to talk about UFC media rights. Those are still out there, but we had some news this week. UFC confirmed to our colleague Adam Stern that they do want to do a fight, a bout, an event on the White House lawn. And the first thing I thought of was Netflix, that they could make this into that sort of event that they did with Mike Tyson. This is something that I think would be incredibly attractive to them if they were really interested in those media rights. I still think that they end up with that, but maybe this is something that gets it across the finish line for them.
No, I agree with you for sure. And especially we have tomorrow the Katie and Amanda fight on Netflix at MSG. And Netflix is definitely interested in combat sports. Austin, would you watch a fight at the White House?
Yeah. And I don't even think it mattered whether it was boxing or mixed martial arts. If there's going to be a fight on the White House lawn, I'm going to watch it for the spectacle of it. I am.
This is not something you would have even said 10 years ago. But I did see that Conor McGregor is interested.
No, 10 years ago, they were still arguing. You had guys like John McCain arguing whether UFC was human cockfighting. So we've come a long way to where, you could potentially have a UFC fight on the White House lawn. But Dana White has that relationship with Donald Trump. That is where we are.
And controversial Irish star Conor McGregor is interested in returning for the White House. I do have to give Conor some credit. He gave me my first front page when I worked at the Irish Daily Mail because he got in a fight in Brooklyn. So
kudos to Conor. But what makes that more attractive than just having the White House lawn? Conor McGregor. It just adds to the marvel, the attraction of, I think, that somebody like a Netflix would want for that sort of event.
Absolutely. And I think Netflix would do a really great job producing it.
All right, Molly, before we get to our interviews talking baseball with MLB Network's Robert Flores and Fox Sports' Joe Davis, let's do some quick hitters. UEFA Women's Euros early numbers are in. Sounds like Mike Mulvihill may have sandbagged us on how big the increases were going to be.
He was saying 50% through the first 10 matches. It's up 123% over 2022. And then France's 2-1 win on Saturday over England was up 329%. And it's the most watched group stage match.
How many viewers did that get, Molly?
It got 690,000 viewers, Austin.
That's pretty solid. Pretty solid.
For a group stage match? Absolutely. And Austin, we've talked a lot about football already, but Orlovsky's re-signed with ESPN. Is that surprising to you?
No surprise to me that Dan Orlovsky is back in Bristol. Does so much there. He's incredibly talented, not just on the NFL side. I think he could talk college. He's very personable and does a lot of other things there for the company. So shout out to CEA Sports for their client getting that re-signing. And I think we have some more ESPN talent news that's going to be coming down the pike soon. Speaking of ESPN, Molly, Banana Ball. It's averaging around 500,000 viewers on the Deuce this summer, 4 telecasts so far. Any surprise there for the Savannah Bananas?
Honestly, not really. It's a fun property. Have you watched a game?
Absolutely. Not live, but I've watched a couple on TV, and it is entertaining.
Yeah, I've never been in person before either, but even look at their social media following. Like the Savannah Bananas are averaging like millions of viewers on TikTok. It's a really fun property, and people just kind of want to have fun in the summer. Austin, we're coming to the close of Wimbledon. You and I talked last week about the exodus of Americans. What do you think about the viewership so far?
Well, as long as there are some Americans left, you're going to have a little bit of interest, but they're not the biggest names. Taylor Fritz on the men's side, Amanda Anisimova, I didn't even know that she was American, so you do not have the biggest draws, at least among American women, within that Final Four at Wimbledon. I'm not sure you're going to get what a Coco Gauff would have drawn.
Hey, maybe this is Amanda's Coco Gauff moment. You don't know.
Molly, NASCAR had its Chicago street race, the third time it's had that. I know your mom was really pissed off about the traffic going on there in Chicago, but is it going to be the last one that we see for NASCAR on the streets of Chicago?
If I get one more call from my parents on the 4th of July weekend about the NASCAR street race and their complaints, like I have any control over it, like go call NASCAR. It looks likely that they're going to leave Chicago. Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, is open to having it continue, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a 4th of July.
I think all the aldermen there definitely want it off of July 4th weekend. You're cutting into probably a lot of tourism and creating a lot of headaches around a holiday weekend. Our colleague Adam Stern has said San Diego, that might be the next street race, so I think that could be interesting. Would it be July 4th? I don't know, but I do know the numbers this year. We've talked about cable versus broadcast, around 4.6 million viewers for that first race in Chicago 2 years ago for the first iteration. It was on TNT this year. You're getting around a third of that, so the numbers really aren't there this year.
I would head to San Diego for a street race.
I think it sounds really cool. Great views there. I think it'd be a smart move for NASCAR.
Austin, you and I could say hi to some seals. We could watch some cars. It would just be a great trip. SBJ, you want to pay for that? Austin, last thing I want to hit on. We have All-Star and Home Run Derby coming up with MLB. What are some of your numbers predictions there?
I'm always watching to see, is this the year where Home Run Derby passes the All-Star game in audience number? It's been really close. Last year wasn't as close as it was the year before that. I think it is going to get closer this year, that audience number. I'm worried about whether the All-Star game sees another record low. It didn't see it last year. It was slightly above that record low figure. Does it dip below 7 million viewers this year? It's still incredibly strong for an All-Star game, but I'm watching to see whether MLB, with increased out-of-home measurement and all that, stays above 7 million viewers and maybe approaches 8 million viewers, stays away from that record low number for the All-Star game in particular. But Molly, like you mentioned, MLB All-Star weekend is upon us. The draft is on Sunday night. Then you got Derby, you got All-Star, the celebrity of game. You have all these things happening.